State Department of Education. I would like to see progressive policies passed with teacher input, and I think the state is in a unique position to be able to identify best practices statewide and then help with efforts of scaling out those best practices. I'd also like to see the Department of Education work with aligning research-proven pedagogy to our assessment metrics, because right now there's clear tension. We've talked about it a lot, but when you do project-based learning, your kids aren't assessed that way. And so I think the State Department can work with teachers to look at assessment metrics and pedagogy. I also believe that when we're looking at assessment metrics, and we've talked about this a lot, but there's a real need for a paradigm shift in looking at individualized instruction, individual growth plans for the student that could follow them K through 12, and assessment and growth could be measured that way instead of a kind of a snapshot of where the student is at that particular time. So I think the state is in a unique position to look at doing individual growth plans that are continuous, that are for the student throughout their whole education experience. I also think that looking at the state funding formula might be an interesting endeavor too. We talked in our small group about you have a state that spends maybe $6,000 per student and a state that spends maybe $12,000 per student, and looking at how those funding formulas are established. We still have incredible social inequities in our school systems just within one community about how much funding one school gets versus another school. And we're putting our students at a huge disadvantage if we don't look at those funding formulas more carefully, because we're setting some students up for failure. I also think that the state could help with consistency of goals, and I mentioned this in my smaller group, but sometimes teachers are kind of going through all these trends and fads, and there's not really a clarity of what should we focus on now, and when we have changes of leadership. I've been a teacher for 8 years. We've gone through 3 major initiatives and 3 leadership changes. So each time there's a new principal, he or she wants to come in with their program. And so then it's easy for teachers to, as we've said, think, well, this too will pass. And so I think the state can help with the clarity of goals. Most powerful professional development happens when it's over a long period of time and the goal is maybe 1 or 2 things that you're looking at, not several. So I think that would be something to look at. And I think colleges of education can help too. I think they're in a position to be a good partner and provider of professional development. I think that could be a mutually beneficial exchange. I think that colleges of education can partner with school districts that they identify as being kind of forward-thinking, innovative, technology-rich environments. And in return, those practicing teachers can help the pre-service teachers learn those technologies and how they work in the classroom. I think that would be a powerful partnership. And I think that colleges of education should continue to look at conducting research to help guide state policy of what best practices are and mirror good teaching. I think colleges of education should, by their nature, mirror what good teaching is and to practice the research. So, thank you.
It's nice to have customer feedback, right? Something we all need to pay lots of attention to. So we have about, I can't quite see the clock, probably time for 3 or 4 questions. If anybody would like questions really to anybody up here on the panel. I think you're recording this, right?
Mike Searson, the School for Global Education and Innovation at Kean University. I just want to make a comment about what you said about Skype. Don Knizik mentioned that I led a group to China about a month ago. And in the 5 years that I worked in China, their networks are shut down much more than they have been in the past, in part due to the 20th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. It was interesting how many of the Chinese colleagues expressed frustration about that. But they'd be even more frustrated to come to a country when the internet is open. We shut down classrooms. So shame on us. As Tom Carroll said, there are 120 people in this room who can go back and change things immediately. And those who can do that should do that right away. Thank you.
Other questions or comments for anybody here on the panel? Yeah.
I just want to say that that is one of the best panels I've ever listened to.
Yes.
And I thank you very much.
I like Vanna White. I always wanted to be Vanna White.
I'm glad you said that.
I'm glad you didn't.
I'd like an E. I guess this could be addressed to the entire panel. Jim Vanitas from HP. I think, who was it that was talking about, it was Dick, you mentioned about doing things to the existing system and then some transformations and all. And I think through the last 2 days we've been all struggling with this tension between those two things. How do you in your own mind, and the rest of you too, how do you balance the sort of action we need to take now and the what do we do transformational, and are they mutually exclusive, or how do you deal with that?
Sort of, what do you do today, and what's the vision of the future, and how do you balance?
Well, I think like any educator, you have to keep constantly pushing for improvement and innovation. It has to become a part of your normal daily life. That's why when I was looking at those particular indicators on the first page of the summary sheet, it was real clear to me, these are things we could actually do. Sure, they take time, they take planning, they take partnerships and collaboration, but we need to start. We have to move in the interim. A big idea, like restructuring an entire school district and a college of ed together, takes a lot of planning. It takes an enormous amount of cover. You've got to go to your legislature. You've got to talk to Bill Gates. You've got to do a lot of things to be able to put something like that into place. And of course, your outcomes are going to be larger too as a result of that effort. But that's the big goal. And so you're always doing the short term and the long term at the same time. And I think most educators do this almost always. You're always, what's my lesson plan for today? What am I going to be doing today with these kids? And then how am I going to change my entire class's position or process?
I guess the one thing I want to add to it, though, is, and I understand Chris Deedy made these comments last night, I was not here, but I think that the first step is get the vision. Because the issue is whether the incremental is headed toward the vision or whether the incremental is just incremental improvement. So I think that the goal of this work should be to provide a vision that all of us can share, and those of us that can do it in a transformational way, obviously that's preferable, and those of us who are going to take it to incremental reform. But the vision's critical, because I think incremental improvement that's not headed toward the right vision is what's getting people frustrated. I do think you can do both, but I think you ought to be headed in the same place.
The piece that I was, in a system as large as we represent, whether you think you're transformational or shut it down and open, it's incremental by definition. I mean that in a depressed way, but a truthful way. And I thought when Arnie Duncan said, the measure of our success will be Detroit, that was a great statement. I want to see the transformation. I want to see it shut down and reopened working. When it's that concentrated and that systemically a failure, it is all of our obligation. That's a federal, state, district capacity failure. So to go after that is a series of experiments, and we need the innovation zones, we need the collaborative circles to protect the stumble, we have to be informing each other about the learnings, but we have to do it as a collective, if you will. So I'm one of those that says, what's been missing for me, after 40 years of these wonderful experiments that don't go to scale, we have not yet figured out what the second and third loop of learnings need to be when the ones in the center are doing with the experiment. We can't allow them to be alone in the experiment. We have to have already anticipated the next level of most likely. They have to be quick loops of information back and forth so that whatever the innovation is already has a learning support system and it already has a ramp-up strategy. But in that sense, I do think in the short time right now that we're entering, we're going to have more opportunities for the innovations than we've ever had. But those who take the risk are going to need the rest of us in a circle of learning community protection, because unless you think all the designs are already guaranteed to work, we're going to see some failures. And we cannot allow those courageous enough to do this with good designs to fail and then be blamed. The other opportunity we have that we didn't have 25 and 30 years ago is we're much better at deciding what our interim benchmark indicators are of the steps towards the vision. So assuming you get the vision first and then the instrumentation proposal, what are the systems you're talking about? What are the indicators in the system? And what are the benchmark changes? And those information systems now can at least be created, and the benchmarks can be identified, and you can buy some of the